Hello and welcome to another TLDR Explains video. This one's going to be on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, which, as you might have guessed, is a big dam that's being built in Ethiopia. You might be wondering why we're making a video on an Ethiopian dam, but it's causing some political strain between Ethiopia and Egypt, and might trigger a water war between the two countries, something which we'll endeavour to explain in this video. If you're sick of the coronavirus and want to check out some non-COVID content, then our new series Opinionated is out now. It's the series where we tackle big issues, show the pros and cons for each topic, and then analyse our audience's response to each issue. The first episode on whether university tuition should be free is available right now, but for a small fee, you can access the whole season immediately. Find out more and watch the first episode by clicking the link below. So before we dive into the details of the conflict, let's give you some context. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, otherwise known as the Renaissance Dam, or GERD, is being built on the Blue Nile, the larger of the two main tributaries of the Nile River, the other being the White Nile. The Blue Nile begins at Ethiopia's Lake Tana and is responsible for about 85% of the Nile's flow, which is about 84 billion cubic metres of water annually. While the Nile is incredibly long, at about 4,100 miles, it's surprisingly shallow and doesn't actually carry that much water. For context, the Congo River has an output of 1,000 billion cubic metres, about 14 times that of the Nile. Nonetheless, it runs through 10 African countries: Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Congo, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda and Burundi, who all rely on it to some degree for fresh water. Historically, most of the Nile's water has gone to Egypt, which sort of made sense, given that it was the most populous and most developed of the Nile's countries for most of history. In 1929, the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty, signed by the United Kingdom as the dominant colonial power in East Africa, guaranteed Egypt and Sudan 48 billion and 4 billion metres of cubic water respectively, out of the 84 billion available. In 1959, Egypt and an independent Sudan signed a bilateral treaty which gave Egypt 55.5 billion cubic metres and Sudan 18.5 billion cubic metres. And it also gave them a veto over any upstream developments. As you might have noticed, this agreement didn't leave much water left for the remaining 8 countries, who only had 10 billion cubic metres to share between them. This might have made some sense back then, when Egypt and Sudan were by far the biggest countries. But things have changed, especially in Ethiopia. Ethiopia now has a population of about 110 million people, 10 million more than Egypt, making it the second most populous African country after Nigeria. In fact, according to the IMF and the World Bank data, over the last 10 years, Ethiopia has averaged a 9.5% GDP growth and 7.7% GDP per capita growth, making it the fastest growing economy in the world. Nonetheless, it's still struggling. Ethiopia has a per capita water consumption of 125 cubic metres per year, which is tiny. For context, Egypt has a per capita water consumption of 570 cubic metres per year, and the global average is about 1,000. Ethiopia also has a national energy production capacity of only about 4,000 megawatts and a per capita energy consumption of about 65 kilowatt hours per year. Again, for context, Egypt's per capita energy consumption is 1,510 kilowatt hours per year, and the UK is about 5,000. Finally, Ethiopia has an import-export imbalance, which means that it buys more stuff than it sells, meaning a permanent shortage of foreign currency to pay off government debt. A dam could solve all 3 of these problems. It guarantees water, electricity, and maybe even enough electricity to sell to neighbouring countries to build up their foreign currency reserves. Which is why, in 2011, Ethiopia announced the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. At the time, Hosni Mubarak had just been ousted in Egypt, and the Arab Spring was just kicking off, so no one paid that much attention to it. But since then, it's become a serious issue. Before we get into the politics of it, a bit on the dam itself. The Renaissance Dam, which is about 70% complete, will be the largest in Africa and the 7th largest in the world. The dam itself is 1,800 metres long and 145 metres wide, and will be able to produce 6,500 megawatts of electricity, more than doubling Ethiopia's current production. And it's right next to the Sudanese border, who say that they want to buy any excess electricity. The project cost sits at about $5 billion, including $1.8 billion worth of Chinese loans. To finance the rest of the money, the Ethiopian government started a lottery, took a month of all government worker pay in 2018, and even had to issue a patriotic bond, which are basically when the citizens lend their own government money. The reservoir is the size of Greater London, with a maximum capacity of 67 billion cubic metres, and Ethiopia plans to start filling it as early as July this year. This is bad news for downstream countries, and especially Egypt, which relies on the Nile for 90% of its fresh water, 85% of which is used for crop farming. According to Al Jazeera, if Ethiopia fills the dam over the next 10 years, this would mean a 14% decrease in water supply to Egypt, which would mean 18% of Nile farmland being destroyed. If they filled it over 7 years, this would mean a 22% loss of water and 33% of farmland being destroyed. If they filled it in just 5, this would mean a 36% loss of water and 50% of Nile farmland being destroyed. So you can see why Egypt are resistant to the plan. It's worth saying here that Egyptian farming uses a very inefficient method of surface irrigation, which, according to an MIT study, causes high water losses, decline in land productivity, and salinity problems. So this destruction of farmland isn't necessary, but it is likely. Anyway, you can see the issue here. Egypt relies heavily on the Nile for fresh water, and when Ethiopia starts filling its reservoir, this will put strain on Egypt's supply. But Ethiopia sees the dam as a solution to all of their problems, and sees Egypt as a bit demanding. This has been a problem waiting to happen for years now. Obviously, the 1959 agreement, which gave Egypt and Sudan basically all of the water, was clearly unfair. And because of this, the Nile countries tried to agree to something new in 1999, when they launched the Nile Basin Initiative, with the support of the World Bank. But when the upstream countries, including Ethiopia, proposed the Cooperative Framework Agreement in 2010, which proposed equitable utilisation of the Nile's resources, Egypt and Sudan demanded a veto of any developments upstream. The upstream countries refused, and Egypt and Sudan left the initiative, although Sudan did later rejoin. Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia then started dam-specific negotiations in 2011, but nothing substantial has been agreed, although, because of these negotiations, Ethiopia backtracked on their original plan, which saw the reservoir filled in just 3 years, agreeing to extend the time frame and limit the disruption. The US stepped in to mediate discussions in November 2019, but in March, Ethiopia accused the US of being undiplomatic and refused to take part in the next round of talks after the US told Ethiopia to stop construction until an agreement was reached. But an agreement was always a long shot. Egypt has got used to having the Nile to itself, and it's obviously of massive cultural significance, which means that any concession was always going to be politically difficult. In Ethiopia, the dam has been sold as the solution to Ethiopia's problems. It's literally called the Renaissance Dam. Ethiopian citizens have even bought patriotic bonds, and with the Ethiopian elections planned for 2020, it's hard to see any political space for manoeuvre. Ethiopia is also less likely to make a concession now that Sudan has softened a bit, and they did this for 3 reasons. Firstly, Sudan is less dependent on the Nile than Egypt. Secondly, they've been promised cheap electricity. And third, Ethiopia claims that the dam will limit flooding on the Blue Nile. This is why some people think that the Renaissance Dam might trigger a water war between the two countries. Egypt has even threatened to bomb the dam. And in response in October, Ethiopia's Prime Minister said no force can stop Ethiopia from building a dam. If there's need to go to war, we could get millions readied. Which was a bit ironic, considering that the Prime Minister had just won the Nobel Peace Prize for resolving the 20-year Eritrean-Ethiopian border conflict literally days earlier. So that's why Egypt and Ethiopia might be starting a water war. There are other cases like this. India and Pakistan have been fighting over the Indus River for years, and China built a dam upstream of the Mekong River, which flows through Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam. And ultimately, the use of dams and the disruption they cause is an under-discussed part of the future of hydropower. People often tout hydropower as a potential renewable baseload energy source to provide constant electricity when other less reliable renewable sources like solar and wind aren't working. But proponents often forget that there are only so many potential dam sites in the world, and even less politically uncontroversial sites. This sort of problem is only likely to get worse as populations grow and as climate change makes rainfall patterns more erratic. Let us know what you think about this conflict, and if you think that Ethiopia should continue building the dam. Also, let us know if you enjoyed this non-coronavirus video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified when we release further videos. You can also find more from us across all social networks, simply by searching for TLDR News. Special thanks to our Patreon backers for making videos like this one possible.